11th of February 2025. Today I would like to talk about something I had not touched upon until now because I thought it too obvious to address, and this is that the matter of sexual attraction is a matter of the physical and psychological, and not of the social. As I understand it, this is not a matter of opinion, it truly seems like a matter of truth. Here's the dilemma. A large amount of the popular opinion, I would say the majority of them, believe that if a male were in a voluntary romantic relationship with another male or a female with a female, they would automatically be considered homosexual, regardless of their true physical sexual attraction. I understand this as fundamentally untrue. If a gay male were in a relationship with a female, say because his family forces him to, or because he is ashamed of being gay, this would not change the fact that this individual is gay. Sexual attraction cannot be changed. If you are heterosexual, you will be your whole life. If you are homosexual, you will be your whole life. If you are bisexual, you will be your whole life. Sexual attraction is, before anything else, essentially what hormones your body is attracted to. I, for example, am heterosexual. My body is attracted to the female skin texture and the female smell, and slightly repulsed by the male skin texture and the male smell. If I were to have a boyfriend for reasons of my choosing, these physical traits would not change. I would still be heterosexual. Yet popular culture still has a lot of difficulty conceiving this. Popular culture beloves homosexuality, and understandably so. It was a martyrized social reality that has always existed and has long been repressed, only now being socially accepted and beloved to compensate, and beloved for its uniqueness much needed in society. And so individuals may be quick to call themselves gay if, for example, a male is attracted to female-presenting males, such as femboys. Yet, unless it is a physical truth, they are not so. To illustrate this point, I will refer to the ancient Greek, and in a lesser part Roman, practice of pederasty. Now, pederasty is absolutely not something we should celebrate, for although it does show admiration and understanding for homosexuality that would later be repressed by the coming of Christianity, it is a matter of a romantic and sexual relationship between an adult and a teenager, which we thankfully now understand as problematic. However, this practice does give us a clear understanding of how homosexual relationships were seen in antiquity, and it tells us that to the Greeks, one does not need to be gay to be attracted to males that had not yet went through puberty. And it's not like pederasty was restricted to specific individuals. Anyone could form a pederastic relation, which in turn would mean that, according to the popular opinion's understanding of sexual attraction as a social matter, 100% of the ancients would have been homosexual. Obviously, this is not correct. The comparison between how homosexuality was seen in antiquity and how it is now is very interesting to analyze. In antiquity, noticeably in Greece and Rome, they essentially did not know that homosexuality existed, and that individuals could be exclusively attracted to the same sex as them. Yet they did understand that one does not need to be gay to be attracted to individuals of the same sex. And as for today, we understand that homosexuality exists, and we have forgotten that it is not a necessity to be interested romantically and or sexually to individuals of the same sex. The understanding in antiquity is so different to ours. I have learned, for I study archaeology and I have studied history, that the ancient Greeks and Romans essentially understood relations, sexual and romantic, with other males to be relations of fun. It was seen as juvenile and lighthearted, as opposed to the later necessary relation with a female, a necessity to have children that will care for you in old age. The Iliad is our ideal illustrator to this point. Achilles' relation with Patroclus is one of pleasure, fun, and true love, and his relation with Briseis is one of necessity. The last angle to these matters of sexual attraction I would like to address in today's writings is the fact that many in the popular opinion consider that sexual attraction is determined by what gender one is attracted to, as opposed to what sex. Again, and obviously, I understand this as fundamentally untrue. Sexual attraction can be observed in its most basic form to what hormones one is attracted to, what body smell and skin texture, among other things, one will be physically attracted to. The gender of an individual and their partners cannot alternate this physical reality, just as conversion therapy cannot convert. Sexual attraction is unchanging. If a male is attracted to an individual that is male in gender, female in sex, and does not do hormone replacement, this first male cannot be considered gay, for sexual attraction is, unlike the artificial concept of gender, completely non-social. It is physical and psychological. 13th of February 2025. There is a flaw I have observed in my previous perspective. I have been systematically removing physicality from the notion of gender because I understood gender as to be purely social. But if there is a difference between gender and gender expression, this is something I would be wrong about. Dysphoria would thus be a valid indicator of misfit gender to sex, and gender distinct from sex would thus be valid. Under this perspective, I'm currently feeling like the notion of gender as applied to oneself in a non-social context would be perfectly fine. But if we apply gender in social situations, we are creating an immense and probably inevitable risk of in fact perpetuating gender rules. This is how I understand it now. In an ideal society where gender expression was understood as arbitrary, this problem would not exist, and yet it does. Or perhaps I'm just trying to maintain my initial opinion in spite of logical proof against it. And yet again, are there objectively male and female behaviors? Are there objectively male and female ways to feel within your body? This too appears vague and arbitrary to me. I seem to have successfully cultivated in myself the two opposing opinions. One part of me sees no difference between gender and gender expression. It wants to express, of course you're gender fluid, everyone is gender fluid, because gender does not exist. Why do you feel the need to call yourself a woman to dress and act like one? Why must you enforce gender roles so, and how dare you call yourself progressist? What do you mean you feel like a boy? What do you think it means to be a boy? That's just a physical vessel. This part of me feels great frustration towards the popular opinion, and it is counterbalanced by the opposite opinion that I have managed to construct. This part sees gender and gender expression as separate, and thus gender as a valid concept. It recognizes that neurotypical males and females have different inherent behaviors, and thus dysphoria and a misattributed gender to sex behavior can be solved by the understanding of gender distinct from sex. The two perspectives are flawed in separate ways. Gender abolition is flawed in that it presumes that behaviors are non-gendered, which is apparently largely untrue. And gender acceptance is flawed in that it suggests a systematic gender-to-behavior classification, when in truth, gendered behavior is very faint and very arbitrary. It is also flawed in that gender and gender expression are very closely linked, and thus any acceptance of gender enforces gender roles, at least in this day and age. And finally, it is flawed in that it generally proposes that genders must be considered, seen, understood, and interacted with differently in accordance to the gender, and this I am irreversibly opposed to. This seems to be somewhat of a conclusion to this exercise. Probably the most important thing I have learned is that gender abolition is an opinion and not a truth, and it is not exempt of flaw. Yet as we have seen, maintaining the idea of gender does seem a lot more flawed. February 23rd, 2025. You cannot be attracted to a gender. It is not possible. Romantic attraction is about behavior, and behavior is only arbitrarily and artificially attached to gender. There is no objective male or female way to act. Sexual attraction is a matter of the body. It is dictated by body shape, hair, genitals, and far above all else, hormones. The hormones you are attracted to is what dictates your sexual attraction. The skin texture and body smell your body is programmed to find appealing. What I am meaning to say by all of this is that the concept of pansexual is the mean of sense. I have understood two ways of seeing the distinction between bisexual and pansexual. The first says that bisexual is a matter of the body, and pansexual a matter of gender. The second considers that both refer to gender. It considers a range of genders between male and female, and sees bisexual as being attracted to the entire range, and pansexual as having certain stopping points when it comes to attraction. By this understanding, we can conclude that pansexual is completely demude of logic, because one either is attracted to a hormone or isn't. You cannot be attracted to a gender. Gender is an aesthetic. It is not a behavior, for the non-social conditioned behavior between males and females is extremely faint and variable. And if it was to be a behavior, by choosing this definition, we are inexorably stating that an artificial and arbitrary social conditioned behavior should be superposed onto male and female, and that both should be considered differently to each other. This is gender roles. This is what we were striving to abolish before gender became something to choose. Thus, gender is an aesthetic. Not only does this too reinforce gender roles, but also can play no part in romantic or sexual attraction. Everyone is pansexual, and this is because no one is. Similarly to how everyone is gender fluid because no one is. Because male-female aesthetics and behavior are constructs that we fail to see as such. Pansexual considers that if you are in the possibility of being attracted to the same gender, you will be pansexual. And this is arbitrary because gender, as detached from sex, is a social construct. In a day like ours, where hormone replacement Therapy is an option. Any straight male can be attracted to a trans girl doing HRT or a femboy doing HRT, because the hormone is what dictates attraction. Neither of these can change their sexual attraction, for sexual attraction is unchanging, and it is not defined by behavior and aesthetic, but by the hormones only. But even outside of the exceptional case of HRT, any straight boy has in him the possibility of being attracted to a female-presenting male, and vice versa. Ancient Greece and Rome have demonstrated this. Pansexual can make sense, however, if we remove from it the concept of gender and replace the spectrum of female-male gender with a spectrum of estrogen to testosterone. For some people who are biologically bisexual can be more attracted to one than to the other, and under this definition, pansexual has a logic and a use for purpose to be used. But most people in the popular opinion consider that attraction is to gender rather than physicality, and are thus removing the logic in the word pansexual. I have stated that romantic attraction is about behavior, and by this I do not mean gender behavior, for females and males act essentially the same as each other. Aesthetic tied to gender being completely artificial, pansexual as an attraction to gender and not sex, would consider that attraction correlates with a gendered behavior, and thus fails to understand that behavior is mostly not gendered. Females and males essentially act and think the same, so behavior cannot impact core attraction. 5th of March, 2025. An important question we should ask ourselves would be the following. Is romantic attraction enough to qualify whether an individual is gay or straight? We use the word sexual orientation for this last, but let's assume that the wording is wrong. Sexual attraction is certainly a clear-cut indicator for whether one is straight or gay. The hormones one is attracted to would dictate it all. But in this day and age, the popular opinion tends to consider that an individual would be gay even if they were not attracted in a hormonal manner. Thus it must be that to them, romantic attraction is a valid indicator of sexual orientation. Although the matter is nuanced, I disagree with this perspective far more than I agree with it. Here is my reason. If we consider that romantic attraction can dictate sexuality, we are implying male and female behavioral differences that, although do exist, are in truth very faint and moldable. It implies that one would be attracted to either a male behavior or a female behavior, or somewhere between the two, while forgetting that sexuality is not a straightforward indicator of behavior, since gender does not exist, while forgetting that a straight girl can have a very masculine behavior and a straight guy a very feminine behavior, since both of these are very arbitrary and fluctuant. For these reasons, I consider that sexual attraction is an indicator of sexual orientation and not romantic attraction. Of course, as I said, this is a nuanced matter. There are in truth behavioral differences between males and females, and to consider them as indicator for sexuality is not completely illogical. But as I observe it, it still is less logical than to consider sexual attraction alone, for this last is far less arbitrary. Under this logic, I'm proposing that we adopt, I, a male, would still be straight even if I had a boyfriend. Having a boyfriend would not change my hormonal attraction, and romantic attraction would play no part in sexual orientation. Thus, by all logic, my sexuality would not be altered, because in fact, sexuality cannot be altered. Neither the progressive popular opinion of my generation, nor the conservative opinions of the last are adopting this perspective, but as I hope to have demonstrated, it still is the one that is the most logical. And thus I come back to my initial point, that pansexual makes no sense, for it is mostly used to explain that one is in the possibility of being in a romantic and or sexual relationship with an individual of the same sex, even if hormonal and or romantic attraction do not correlate with the relationship. This makes no sense because everyone is disposed to this possibility. The ancient Greek and Roman cultures have demonstrated this, as they were not familiar with the concept of homosexuality and considered that any individual could take pleasure in a romantic or sexual relationship with one of the same sex. If I had a male companion, I would still be straight, for to my understanding, behavioral traits are too vague and arbitrary to correlate with gender attraction, and having a male companion would not alter my hormonal attraction. I suggest that the term pansexual should only be used to suggest, unlike bisexual, an inclination to one sex more than to the other, in a matter that is purely of the physical and not of the romantic. This is my understanding. And of course, I refuse the use of the word pansexual as a replacement to bisexual under the ideology that there are more than two genders. I have sufficiently argumented that there are no genders, that there are made-up constructs that are detrimental to society. 7th of March, 2025. Essentially, my arguments can be simplified into the following phrase. Being gay makes you want a same-sex partner, but having a same-sex partner doesn't inherently make you gay. The reason why my discontentment is axed towards the word pansexual is because it is currently often used in a lack of understanding of this concept. Everyone can be in a same-sex relation, but not everyone is gay. However, everyone is in fact pansexual, as the popular opinion uses the word to say in the possibility of being in a same-sex relation, and thus of course the word has no meaning. Of course not everyone uses the word in this manner. Some seem to use it to say more attracted to one gender than to another, which is a great use for it, but others, however, use it as a replacement to bisexual under the ideology that there are more than two genders, and this I will oppose myself to even more. For although under certain perspectives, the notion of gender opposed to sex has validity, the truth is that considering a metaphysical difference between males and females will only enforce gender rules, which we must strive to abolish. Gender distinct from sex is of the mind only, and not of the body. Male-female differences on the physical are the matter of sex. One can consider that chromosomes are the surest indicator of sex, but I do argue that hormones and body parts, which unlike chromosomes can be altered by bodily modifications, are more than valid enough indicators for sex. After all biological categorization always carry some form of arbitrary trait judgment. And so if an individual does bodily modifications, it is, to my understanding, valid enough to say that their sex has been altered. But still, this is a matter of sex, which gender is distinct from. And by accepting gender as a concept, we're implying that there exist inherent male and female behaviors that I suggest are too vague and fluctuant to deserve classification. Male-female differences in behavior do exist, so the classification of gender is not completely abstract, but maintaining this classification perpetuates gender rules and suggests that males and females should be societally considered differently to one another. This is basically just sexism. This is an unequal understanding and perception and treatment of the two sexes. A logical counterargument would be the following. Since in this day and age sex can be altered and its barriers transgressed so easily, wouldn't it be logical for gender to remain in the order of choosing rather than the observation of physical traits? For example, a female can take testosterone to build up her muscle mass, and a male can do estrogen or simply take testosterone blockers alone to reduce the negative effects of it. These individuals have blurred the physical line of sex, and so to my arguments, their gender is to their choosing. But why not extend this choosing to all individuals, since everyone is disposed to make these bodily modifications? These people can choose where their sex lies, for the line has been blurred, but the concept of gender certainly would extend this freedom of choosing to all. And to this I reply that sex is an arbitrary trait, but gender implies intentful and artificial behaviors, or even more arbitrarily, aesthetics, that we simply should not be superposing on top of sex anymore. Female-male behavioral differences exist, but they are so vague, and although they are the justification for why transgender exists, they are not even the drive for it existing. The drive is to be seen under a specific aesthetic, and to be placed under a specific gender rule that feels more appropriate. It fucking is about gender rules, and no one dares to admit it. If gender rules and aesthetic differences vanished, which we should fight so that they do, transgender would make absolutely no sense anymore. Transsexual would, of course, for that is a matter of the body, and there will always be some unfortunate individuals to feel dysphoria. But transgender only concerns the artificial and societally hurtful concepts of gender, only defendable by the vague behavioral differences between males and females. Transgender people are reinforcing gender roles, even though gender roles are the reasons why they were suffering and had to become transgender. What a fucking mess. There is something that I need to briefly address, and that is the matter of opinion. Since female-male behavioral differences do exist, both the maintaining and the abolition of gender happen to fall into the matter of opinion rather than search for truth. And thus one might criticize my writings for imposing my opinion and not allowing others to maintain theirs. I will keep this in mind, and I will, of course, be open to opposing opinions. But I will also say that the matters of how we consider sexuality in society is no different to politics, and that although we accept that others have differing opinions, the goal of opposing parties still remains to place their ideal methodology on the whole of society, not just on themselves. It is true that by saying that genders should be abolished, I am invalidating individuals' perspectives, but the opposite is true as well. By saying that genders should exist, they are also imposing on all others a perspective that is neither inherently correct nor righteous. We have opposing opinions, and we should both be allowed to maintain them, but ultimately, the perspective chosen by the masses will accept one over the other, even though both are acceptable. I'm not forbidding you to have a differing opinion when I suggest abolition of gender. I am proposing my perspective and methodology that is to be practically placed into society, just as yours currently is. Both of our perspectives concern us all. A counterargument to this would be that acceptance of gender exists more so on an individual level, and the abolition of it is more so about everyone. The differing opinions might not be set upon the same plane. But I think that they mainly are, because by saying that your gender is not the same as your sex, you're inexorably implying that gender can in fact be distinct from sex. And this is an opinion that applies to all, just as mine does. 8th of March 2025. Pansexual does not mean anything. Bisexual means attracted to both genders, and pansexual means attracted regardless of gender. This can be translated in two ways. The first would be that both bisexual and pansexual have the same meaning. The second, and this is the way it is often used, would be to explain that the individual is disposed to being in a same-sex relationship, even if they are not gay or bisexual physiologically. If they were, they would be gay or bisexual, and so pansexual is used as a replacement in this case of non-physiological attraction. So in other words, the word pansexual is used because people are incapable of conceiving being in a same-sex relationship if the individual is straight, or rather suggest that being in a same-sex relationship automatically does not make you straight anymore. I do not agree. I disagree with pansexual for the same reason I disagree with gender, in that it gives more importance to the arbitrary societal and behavioral matters over physical realities. Pansexual is used to say that an individual is disposed to being in a same-sex relation, despite being straight. This would apply to everyone on Earth. Everyone is in the possibility of being in a same-sex relationship. Pansexual just means admitting it for yourself specifically. Gay, straight, and bisexual should not be defined by whether you are in the possibility of being in a certain relation or not, because this is an arbitrary social matter and not a biological truth. The biological truth does exist, and we should not be superposing it with superfluous social considerations that only make sense in this specific point in time. Sexual orientation is not an identity, it is not an aesthetic, it cannot be changed, and it cannot be altered. Understanding this will be more helpful than superposing it with artificial and arbitrary genders and types of attraction. This is my opinion. Although my writings be a grain of sand on a beach, an unheard back thought in the osmosis of the mind of society, I hope that, unlike the popular opinion, it has logic enough to withstand the test of time, and perhaps someday in the future, when the popular opinions will have changed a dozen times to arrive to its more final and unchanging form, some will realize that their new considerations on the matters of sexuality are not so, that a desperate attempt for logic existed even in the fluctuating chaos of changing ideologies that were the 2020s. And that a couple of faint voices were arguing for logic in their scream against the wind.